I put that verse at the beginning of the video because I know Pastor Steven Anderson will see it. After 2 of his children have come forward confirming allegations of abuse of his wife and children, and his wife's abuse of their children, Anderson is doing everything in his power to deny these accusations. He accused his son of lying and having an incoherent story in a now deleted YouTube video that you can watch me react to at a link I will post in the video description. Steven Anderson claims his son John hasn't had his story straight and that his son is untrustworthy. The truth of the matter is that now between 3 Anderson children I've spoken to, all of their stories have been very much in lockstep. Steven Anderson's friend and fellow NIFB preacher, Johnathan Shelley, has also spoken about the accusations, hand-waving away any kind of abuse that may have happened in the Anderson home, saying that John was being manipulated by ill workers, that he may not be remembering things clearly, and that even if things did happen, it's nobody else's business.
You know, I believe that there's a lot of evil people that have taken advantage of Pastor Anderson and his children in this situation, and they're really manipulating his children against him. He's never struck his wife or punched her or done anything like this. He has not abused his wife. I do not believe he abused his children. And the world today loves to twist facts and twist reality and be hypersensitive in these issues. And so a lot of times there's always a little bit of truth to every statement, but they sometimes get exaggerated and taken advantage of.
As for the idea that I'm manipulating anybody here, I was done with NIFB videos. Johnathan reached out to me, and after hearing his story, I felt compelled to give him a platform, just like with the interview you're about to watch. The graphic descriptions of abuse in these videos and the frankness with which they're regarded means that these videos don't really get any kind of ad revenue or get picked up by the algorithm. I'm not making these for money or to go viral. I'm not making these for attention. I am making these videos because I believe these kids need to have their voices heard. These videos can bring me no money and no subscribers, and I would gladly still dedicate my time and effort to bringing them to an audience because I believe it is imperative to help the kids that are still in the Andersons' abusive household. A few days after the video excusing Steven Anderson's abuse, Johnathan Anderson had a recorded interview with Pastor Shelley where Shelley basically admitted that he knew Steven had been abusing his wife and kids.
Testimony from all 4 of my dad's adult children. Interview all of us, talk to all of us, not publicly interview, but have private conversations. I can give you my siblings' phone numbers, you can call them, you can ask them the tough questions, and you can then make your decision based on those.
What information are they going to tell me, John, that I don't know?
So you're saying you know that he beat his wife with spousal punishment?
I asked him the questions that I needed to ask, and he answered them truthfully, and it doesn't contradict anything you're saying.
You can watch Johnathan's interview with Pastor Shelley at a link in the video description as well. And as for Steven Anderson saying that his son is lying, I have good reason to believe that isn't true. Not only have I been in contact with Isaac Anderson throughout all of these interviews and conversations, but I have now interviewed another Anderson child, Steven Anderson's 17-year-old daughter, who is currently on the run from her family. I have now corroborated the stories of 3 of Steven Anderson's children. Independently of one another, I have asked them for vague details of stories one of them might tell me, and in response I would receive full recollections of abuse that lined up with each other's stories. Is it possible that 3 kids now are coordinating some kind of strike to take their father's ministry away? If you're prone to conspiracy, then yes, I suppose it is possible, but I find it far more likely that these victims of trauma and abuse simply want their siblings to be safe. And now I have heard from the eldest daughter, who fled her family for fear of being physically abused and, in her own words, in fear of her life. In the following interview, she corroborates stories from both John and Isaac's testimonies, attesting to brutal punishments like ice-cold showers used as waterboarding and the emotional stress and constant abuse her mother would hurl at her. She also tells the harrowing story of escaping her abusive father and the police who were ready to hand her over, despite her attesting that he was going to physically hurt her. As with each of these videos, I want to give a heavy content warning. Her testimony is important, but it is not easy to hear. Descriptions of extensive physical and mental abuse, stalking, violence against small children, and discussions around vomit may be upsetting to some viewers. So please take that into advisement as we proceed. For brevity and the safety of personal information, I have edited the following interview, but in bringing this additional testimony to light, my hope is that it will be enough to spur action against Steven Anderson and his wife, either from their congregation or law enforcement. Additionally, I will be linking several journalists and media outlets from the Tempe, Arizona area where Steven Anderson and his ministry are located, if you feel so inclined to try and draw media attention to the issue. Why don't you just start telling us your story and who you are and how you got, I mean, not specifically where you are, but how you got to the point that you are with your mother and father, Steven and Zsuszanna.
So, as you said, my dad is Steven Anderson, and a lot of people know him because obviously he's kind of a well-known preacher, especially in like IFB circles, and he started that NIFB or whatever, that whole movement, which is like obviously like an affiliation of pastors. So the thing is though, like what people didn't realize, I don't think in like my church or like other churches, was like he was very abusive, like both to my mom and us like as kids. From a very young age, I can remember my dad would hit my mom, he would like assault her in various ways. To give an example, which like this is like, you know, something random, but we always had like these bar stools in our kitchen, and I remember as a kid, like they were always broken because he would like throw them at my mom, he would hit her with them, he would like hurl them across the room at her head and stuff. And so like we probably bought new bar stools like every month. Like growing up, it was ridiculous, and we were not like very well to do, so like oftentimes we would literally like us kids would like have to like glue these bar stools back together.
In an effort to further corroborate evidence for her story, I went through over a decade worth of Zsuszanna Anderson's blog posts on her mommy blog. In several of the pictures, you can plainly see that there are different sets of bar stools that are around the kitchen counter. And in one particular image, you can see that some of them have clearly been broken and attempted to be repaired.
Like other times, like I remember he got upset at her because she got upset at him because he had like used her sewing scissors for something that like wasn't sewing. And she had like told him like, oh, like don't do that, you know, these are like my special sewing scissors, because my mom was like super into crafting or whatever. And I remember my dad like broke all of her like sewing scissors in half, and he was like throwing them at her, like, and they were like, I remember like some like hit her in the face and like on her arms and stuff. And I remember like being a little kid and like having to clean up all the like broken in half sewing scissors. So it was a lot of things like that growing up, where it was like I not only like saw my mom abused in a lot of ways, like he would like beat her with like this like electrical like extension cable, which he also like would beat us with at times. Sometimes they would like send us out of the house, like sometimes they would be like, okay, go to the backyard, and we would like all be like standing in the backyard, and we could like hear my mom in the house like screaming and crying, and my dad like beating her. And then sometimes like he would just be angry and he wouldn't like even care to like, you know, send us away. So it was like I would have to like take my siblings, like, you know, and like put them in the other room and try to distract them and like read them a story or something. But it was like, you know, it's kind of hard to distract from that kind of thing. My dad, like he would get very, very upset at my mom, and he would be like screaming and yelling at my mom, and he would grab, like, this like always stood out in my mind, but he would like grab her face and like get all angry and like be like shaking her head back and forth. And like I hated like seeing this as a kid, and it like really bothered me. And so I would start crying and stuff. I remember like if I like cried and like my dad like saw me crying when he was like, you know, assaulting my mom or whatever, he would get like very, very upset with me, and he'd be like, oh, what, you think she's right? Like, you think this kind of behavior is okay? Let me guess, you're going to grow up and be just like her, huh? And your husband's going to hate you because you're going to be such a little, like, you know, whatever foul language that I don't really want to use. And so he was like he would always like kind of equate me to my mom in that way and be like, oh, you're going to be just like her, huh? And then what would happen is like after they had fought or whatever, it would like my mom would be like very like frustrated and upset because obviously she was not, happy in that situation. And unfortunately, she kind of like saw fit to take it out on us. And like I remember as a child, like constantly being blamed for my parents' marriage problems and like, you're the reason why we fight. And like if I hadn't had you, like we would have a good marriage. And like, he's only mad at me because of you, which obviously like I was a little kid, like I'm not responsible for my parents' marriage. She would get very upset with me afterwards and would hit me and it was kind of like, especially like growing up as the oldest daughter, right? There was like all this responsibility put on me because my older brothers, the mentality was, well, they're boys, so they're not going to grow up and like be homemakers or whatever. So they weren't expected to do like cooking and cleaning and childcare as much. And my mom was obviously like super overwhelmed. I mean, obviously she had a lot of kids and she was in this abusive relationship. And so growing up, it was like there was kind of all this responsibility put on me where it's like I have to cook and I have to clean and I have to take care of kids. And even when I was like 7, 8, 9, 10, I was like cooking, I was cleaning, I was taking care of little kids. Like even though I was a little kid, it was like there was a lot of responsibility on me to take care of things. And especially since my parents were constantly in this like kind of they would start fighting and it's like they aren't really paying attention to anything but their fight. So then like, kids still have to be fed and they still have to be taken care of and someone still has to put them to nap and clean up the house. The number of times that I found myself like trying to like clean up because my dad would throw things all over the house. Like our house would be trashed because he would like throw all the bar stools and he would throw kids' toys and throw like objects like that were heavy or sharp or something. And it's like the amount of times I found myself like having to clean that up, I'm just kind of like in their line of sight and they just like lash out at me because, I'm there. And everyone else is kind of like, I would kind of move them to a different room and like, oh, here, read this book or whatever. And then it's like, I like cleaning or something. So I'm just who my parents see. So it's like, yeah, of course we're going to get mad at her or whatever. I can remember times when my parents would get in like a serious fight and I would be like comforting my parents afterwards, even though they had said like horrible things to me, or even like they would even like lash out and like hit me because they were so angry. But then it was like I would be comforting them and be like, oh, like it's okay, and like trying to make them feel better. And it was kind of like a lot of like weight as a little kid, because it's like obviously when you're a kid, kids are usually I would think like, they play with their friends or whatever like that. And it was like instead it was kind of like I was constantly like feeling like, I'm responsible for my parents' marriage and I'm the reason why everything's going wrong and I have to make dinner and I have to take care of the little kids and I have to make sure that they don't know what dad's doing to mom in the other room. And when I like got to be a teenager, it was like I kind of decided that the second I turned 18, I was out of there and like I was going to move out the day I turned 18. And so it became kind of a thing of like I wanted to be as prepared for that as possible. So I decided to go to college like early and I wanted to get like good grades and get into a better school. I wanted to, by the time I was 18, like have like my 2-year degree. I wanted to have like been working and making money so that the second I was 18, I could just leave because I was so over it. There was a part of me that was a little bit conflicted because I didn't like the idea of leaving my siblings in that situation. But at the same time, like I kind of had realized that I was reaching like a breaking point personally because like I was so like unhealthy just being in that environment. Like I would constantly like be physically sick from crying and like not be able to keep food down. And I would lose my appetite for days on end. I had like a bunch of like nervous like behaviors where I would like constantly be like chewing my fingernails and like ripping open like my cuticles to the point where like my hands were like completely like ripped apart. Like my hands were always super bloody. And my mom like made fun of me for this like a ton, of course. I was also like very depressed and like I thought about suicide constantly for like, years on end. Like from the time that I was probably like 11 to 15, I thought about killing myself like every day. And like I remember like even as a little kid like praying that God would like kill me because like I just did not want to be around anymore. And I didn't want to like be mean to my parents or anything. I genuinely like I feel bad for my parents in the sense that like they both have terrible lives and they're not happy, and like obviously they've done a lot to like hurt me and my siblings. But it's like I feel bad because at the end of the day, like I'm still young, I can still like hopefully like, turn this around and live a normal life. But it's like from their point of view, like this is their life. And like I always like felt bad because I like knew how miserable they were and like how upset that they were. And so I didn't like want to like be mean or anything when I left. I just wanted to get out of there because I was like, I can't do this. Like if I don't leave, I'm probably just gonna, do something regrettable. I worked really hard at school and I tried my best to like work. My parents did not want me getting a regular job because they didn't want me being like financially able to move out when I turned 18. So I like convinced them to let me like work as a nanny, and I was like trying to save up money that way. And then I actually made the decision to stay with my aunt and uncle over the summer because I was hoping to get a summer job and like save up that money so that I could put it in like a checking account, and as soon as I was 18, I could move out with that money. Funnily enough, like my mom literally said like to my dad about me going, she was like, well, I don't want her to go because they're gonna like treat her really well, and like I don't want her like being treated well by them or something. So she like really did not want me to go. But my dad's like perspective on it was like he was like, oh well, we're sure that like she's gonna annoy them and like, they're gonna blow up at her and like yell at her and whatever. And so like they'll treat her like she deserves and like she'll want to come back or whatever. So I left and I went to my uncle's house, and it was great at first, like everything was going fine. My parents didn't really like care what was going on. Like they didn't text or call me. Like basically my cousins were going to a summer camp, and my uncle was like, "Oh, you should go to summer camp. This is kind of your last chance. Like you're already like out of high school. You might as well like go because, you're going to be an adult." Like so I went to summer camp, and while there like someone overheard something that I said. So my counselor was like very concerned about me, and because like she had overheard me saying something, she had kind of realized that like she I guess like knew I guess she like knew who my dad was. And then like because she was like kind of concerned by my behavior, and then she like overheard me saying something about my mom like being like abusive towards me, she basically was like, okay, well, she put the pieces together and was like, okay, something's not right here. So she took me aside and like asked me about it, and I just kind of played it off and was like, oh, like it's not a big deal, everything's fine. Like, but she was like, well, I'm a mandatory reporter, so since I know that you said something about your mom being abusive, like I have to report this. I kind of freaked out because I did not want her reporting anything, because I was like, well, if she makes this report, my parents are going to know that it came from me in some way. Like I knew that they would know that I wouldn't have made a report myself, but I was like, they're going to know that it came from me, like at least vaguely. She made the report, and my mom called me a couple days later and was like, hey, there was just this CPS report and it was about you specifically, and it was about me being abusive towards you. Like, do you know anything about that? And I was like, well, here's what happened. Like, I said something at camp. It was, like obviously interpreted that way. And then I didn't want it to become a report or anything, but, she kind of was like worried about me about a bunch of other things already. So she was like super concerned, and like, she kind of knew that I wasn't telling the truth when I said everything was fine. And so at first my parents were like, okay, whatever. But then a couple days later, I guess, they just kind of like freaked out because CPS came to their house, and they were like super worried about like what would happen, and they didn't want me saying anything to CPS if CPS came to me in South Carolina where I was like staying. They didn't want CPS to come to me, and then obviously I have like countless stories of abuse on both my mom and dad. I like tried to assure them like, listen, like I won't say anything to CPS, just please let me stay until like when I'm actually supposed to go home. And my dad was like, no, like you're like the stupidest person ever. Like, I don't trust you to talk to CPS because you're so stupid.
Did he really say that?
Yeah.
Like those exact words?
He said you are so stupid that like he was like, if CPS talks to you, like even if you don't want to say something, he's like, you're so stupid and like that like if CPS comes to you, like you're gonna say something and you're gonna get us all in trouble or something. And so I tried to explain to him, like, listen, I won't say anything. I'm just going to let them know that I'm fine and everything's fine, you know? And he was like, no, like, you're just too dumb. Like, I don't trust you. And he was like, you're flying back, like, right now. And I was like, no, like, I don't want that, like, you know? And so I kind of, like, dissuaded him from, like, sending me home that day because he was, like, so worried about, like, CPS coming and, you know, talking to me. During this time, he was actually scheduled to preach at a church in South Carolina that had just been like planted by one of his like pastor friends. And so he was like coming and visiting, and I was like super nervous about seeing him because obviously at any time my dad is very like, you know, from 1 second to the next he can just snap and like get super angry, and like he'll go from being like pretty jovial and like joking around to like having like zero mercy and just like freaking out at somebody in like 1 second. Because I knew that things were already like very fragile with my parents, I was super worried about it because I had like narrowly avoided being sent home that day. And it was only because I agreed, like, okay, I won't say a word to CPS. Like, I'm just going to lay low, like, you know. And so my dad came to town. Thankfully, he wasn't staying at my uncle's house. So I only saw him a couple times, and I just tried to like, you know, politely avoid him, not really talk to him. I didn't really want to talk to him, and like I made sure to like never be in a room alone with him essentially because I was like super worried about like, okay, I don't want to be sent home and I don't want him like getting super upset and like, you know. And he left town, and a couple days after that, I guess, my mom like heard more about the report, and she was like convinced that like I had said something like specific and like wanted to get them in trouble. And so my dad called me on the phone just in an absolute rage and was just like, you're coming home tonight. Like, you do not get to stay there, like, under any circumstances. He was like super angry, and he was like, you're going to come home like right now and like you're going to suffer. Like, I will make you suffer for what you did. He was like acting so like crazy on the phone that I was like terrified. And so I was just like packing my bag and whatever. And he called me again. And he just sounded like so ridiculously like angry and upset, and was like telling me like, you know, when you get home, like you're gonna pay for this. Like, you better know it. Like, you're in so much trouble. And like in that moment, like when he was on the phone, like saying all this, like I was like so scared. And I also just like I had this thought of like, why? Like, why am I letting this happen to me again? Like, I've let this happen to me my entire life. Like, I've seen it happen to my mom. I've seen it happen to my siblings. I can't even count the number of times I've had this happen to me where he just blows up at me and freaks out and starts, you know, hitting me or whatever. And I was just like, why am I going to put myself through this again? Like, do I really want to go home and just be told that I'm trash and have my head slammed into a wall? Like, I'm a grown woman. Like, why am I not like taking responsibility for myself? Like, this is ridiculous. And so I hung up the phone with him. And I went downstairs where like my aunt and uncle were, and they were obviously like super concerned. And I went to them and I said, I was like, listen, I was like, I just got off the phone with my dad, and I was like, and I'm not going home. I was like, if I go home, I don't know what they're gonna do to me, but it doesn't sound good. And in the past, like my brother Solomon, my dad like has violently assaulted him. And my brother Isaac, he actually said that he was going to kill my brother Isaac once, and like he like bashed my brother Isaac's head into the floor and then stepped on it, which is obviously very extreme. And in both situations, like the first one with my brother Solomon, my parents, like, he hadn't done anything like significant or anything. It was actually because he had like watched YouTube and The Office, if anyone's familiar with that show. And in the second situation, my parents like were upset at him for some other things, but it was like the first situation, my parents were not even like, it wasn't like a major like rule breaking. Because I was thinking back on these like past events of like, okay, you know, as a little kid, it's like you steal a cookie or something and your parents are gonna like beat you up with like an electrical cord or something, or like we would like make a joke that like, you know, my parents didn't like, or we would say something in public that was like embarrassing or be too loud or something, and it's like we would get the fire beaten out of us, where it's just like we have bloody marks and bruises and we're wearing long sleeves for like 3 weeks afterwards. I thought to myself, like, how much more when he's this angry is he gonna just go insane on me? Because also, as a child, I was like very like I went along with anything my parents said. I like did everything I could to not get in trouble. Like I pretty much let my parents do whatever they wanted to me, and like if they told me something, I just did it blindly because I was like terrified of my parents. And so I thought to myself, like, this is the only time that I've like really, really upset them. And I thought, like, in the past, if they've already like done so much to hurt me, like physically and emotionally, I was like, if I come home now, like, I don't know what's gonna happen. There's no telling what's gonna happen. And they were like, no, absolutely not. They were like, we love having you. They were like, we're your family. We have like an obligation to take care of you. And they were like, honestly, it's been super hard, like, you know, knowing about this situation in the last couple of days and like not really being able to do anything because our hands were tied. So they were like, you know, if this is like your final decision, then yeah, we would be happy for you to come and live with us. I texted my parents when I was like supposed to be arriving in Phoenix. I just kind of texted them and said, I'm not on that plane. I never got on the flight and I'm not coming home. I was just like, and I went about it in a very like nice and graceful manner. I was just like, hey guys, I love you. I forgive you for everything. But I was like, I don't want to go home because I was like, I don't feel safe going home. And I had told my parents previously, like, I'd actually told them, I had said, like, I will come home and stuff. But I was like, if you can assure me that you're not going to lay hands on me. And of course they didn't, because that was their exact plan. I was very like kind about it because like I didn't want to like be mean to my parents. I mean, like, no matter what they've done, I don't really believe in like, you know, being hateful towards people. And I woke up the next morning and I was locked out of my bank account. They had locked me out of both my phone and laptop. They had canceled everything that they had access to. And it was like suddenly it was just me, and my family wasn't, you know, they hadn't even said a word to me. And it was just like, I have this suitcase of clothes and I'm 17 and it's up to me to just kind of start over. And I couldn't talk to my siblings, obviously, because my parents didn't want me talking to them, something about like corrupting them or something, which like, I'm not, you know, out here corrupting anybody, whatever that means. And I got a job as a barista, and I loved my job. Like, I was super happy with it and very excited. Like, I was super excited every morning to go to work. I was very happy when I came home from work. Like, and it was like a good feeling because for the first time ever, I felt like I was like taking responsibility for myself and my life. And I was like, I'm not just some helpless victim anymore. Like, I'm actually like caring for myself, and like I have a plan for my future, and I'm like working, and I get to like, you know, live my own life, and no one's screaming at me and telling me that they want to spit in my face every time that they see me because I make them so physically sick. Like, no one's hitting me. No one's, you know, giving me a bloody lip and expecting me to come up with some story of how I got it. It was kind of a good feeling in that I was like, I'm finally like free, you know? But it was also a bad feeling in that like I had a suitcase full of stuff and that was it. And it was like, suddenly I can't talk to my siblings, and my parents just are silent. They aren't really saying a word to me. And I almost felt kind of like insulted by it because I was like, at least if they would have gotten angry, it would have showed that they like at all cared, but they just like did not care at all. They were just like, okay, let's take all your stuff, like, you know. And so they just kind of like erased me from their lives, essentially. Like, my siblings moved into my old room. They just quit talking about me and just kind of pretended like, you know, nothing was happening. I was at work, and this was probably like 2 weeks ago, like maybe a little bit over that. I was at work and I get a call from my brother. And it was like missed call. So on my break, I call my brother back. I'm like, hey, you know, what's going on? Like, I saw that you tried to call me. And he's like, oh, Dad's at your uncle's house, you know? And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, Dad came to his house and was like screaming and threatening him and saying that he like had to give you up. which at this point, my dad had not said a word to me. Like, as far as my dad had not told me to come home even once. I had texted my dad on his birthday and said, like, happy birthday, Dad, I love you, or whatever. And, you know, that was pretty much like the only communication we had had. I think at one point I like gave him an update. I was like, hey, you know, I'm fine, you know, here's where I'm working. I told him that I like started seeing somebody because like I still had this like idea in my head of like I don't want to like make my parents think that I don't care about them or something, like, and like I wanted to like not like be like mean or hurtful to them. So it was like I would still like text them every once in a while and like update them on my life. The only thing that he had actually said to me was like when I texted him happy birthday, I think he said like thanks or something. But it was like that was it. So I was shocked because he had said nothing to me, but suddenly he's like at my uncle's house, like threatening him and screaming at him. And I'm like at work. So I'm super like scared and like what's going to happen. Because like at this point, I was just like, what in the world? Like if he's all the way over here, and he had already said like so many like weird things to like my family since then. And so I was like, if he like finds me, like bad things are going to happen to me, especially since I had been gone for like months by now. You know, police were involved because my dad had like threatened to call the police. And so the officer called me and he was like, hey, he was like, we're going to come to your work. And he was like, you know, we need to talk to you and like get your testimony and whatever and like figure out what's going on. And so I was kind of under the impression that like an officer would just kind of show up and they'd talk to me and I would like explain like the abuse that was going on and why I hadn't gone home, and that they would, you know, like file some kind of a CPS report and that I would not be like taken out of my uncle's house immediately. And what had, you know, caused this impression was that the night before, actually, the police had come to my door in the middle of the night and basically said, hey, Steven Anderson says that like you have his daughter and he wants her back home. And they had basically like told my uncle this. And so they had said like, oh, but we're not going to like take you home immediately. Like that would be insane because obviously like you're safe here because, you know, they showed up and they were like, obviously you're safe. Everything's fine here. So we're not going to take you away from here if the situation at home is abusive. And the officer showed up and he asked me to explain everything, which I did. And I explained past abuse and why I was not going to be able to come home. And I told him like, my dad has multiple times threatened me in this specific situation. He was already abusive to me before I left, but he's going to be far more abusive now that he's angry at me. If I go home, I don't know what's going to happen to me. I was like, I wouldn't put it past my dad to kill me in a fit of rage. I was like, I've seen him slam people's heads into like the floor, the walls. And the officer was just like, well, you know, like if he like hurts you or something, just record it. And just like, then, you know, like you can talk to CPS about it. Because he was like, well, it's not my jurisdiction until he assaults you on South Carolina soil. So he was like, until he like specifically, and I was like, well, he was like, he has to like threaten or assault you on South Carolina soil. And I was like, well, he said that he was going to make me suffer, like, and that he wanted to hurt me and that he was gonna, and he was like, no, because it has to be like a specific threat. He was like, it has to be like a specific, like, here's what I'm gonna do. And he has to like specifically explain this and you have to have a recording of it. And I was like, well, first of all, I was like, when my dad takes me, I was like, the first thing he's going to do is confiscate my phone. I was like, that is the first thing he's going to do. Because I was like, he doesn't want me calling for police or anything. And I was like, and also I was like, if my dad starts assaulting me, like, it's not like I'm going to be able to pull out my phone and start recording or call for help. And I was like, it doesn't take very long to permanently maim or kill someone. I was like, so it's too late at that point. And I was like, and you're right. Like when my body washes up in a swamp or something, you guys can be like, oh, yay, it's our jurisdiction now. I was like, but it's like, something has to be done now. I was like, I kind of realized like, wait a minute, like I have to make a run for it. Like the police are not going to do anything because I like pleaded with this officer, like, please just don't send me home. I was like, please do something, like anything you can to stall. Just like think, like, is there anything you can do? And I was like, the officer last night when he was at my house, he told my uncle that no one was going to, you know, take me out suddenly. And like that obviously they wouldn't send me home to like a terrible situation if they knew that. And he was just like, no, like there's nothing that we can do for you. Like you just have to go. Like, and my dad was like in this I worked at a Starbucks, and he was like at the Starbucks, like screaming and yelling, and like he was like, oh, like my wicked daughter, like he was just like screaming in public. And so I like convinced him, like very like hesitantly, to like wait for my aunt and uncle. And he was like not at all pleased with this, and he kept like being like, when are they gonna be here? When are they gonna be here? And I was like, well, they live like 40 minutes away. Like, you're just gonna have to wait. And I was pretty much like racking my brain, like, of what I could do. And so I told him, like, okay, I have to go to the bathroom, because I was like, well, if I go to the bathroom, maybe I can, get away. Because he also had told me, like, oh, well, you can just book a different flight at the airport and just go somewhere else. And I was like, I don't know how you think I'm going to book a flight and get on a flight without my dad noticing. Like, how's that going to work? But I don't know. And so I was like, maybe I can just go to the bathroom and, leave. And so he was like, oh, I think you're just trying to run. Like, I think that's why you're trying to go to the bathroom. And so I went to like leave to go to the bathroom. And in leaving the break room, they had told me that my dad was far away, but they hadn't told me that like he would be able to see me and I would be able to see him when I came out that door. And so I looked across the way to where the like cafe was, and I saw my dad. And like just seeing my dad like triggered me so badly in that moment that like I screamed, and just like I completely lost it at this point. Like, I had been trying to like hold it together on some level. Like, I had already like cried multiple times, but I was like trying not to come across as like too like, I didn't want them to think of me as like this like helpless kid or something, because I was trying to get out of this situation and I wanted them to like take me seriously. And so I was trying not to like freak out. I wanted to keep my head. Seeing my dad, and he looked like so crazed and angry, I like freaked out. I completely lost it. And I ran back in the break room, and I was like throwing up. And I was like shaking so violently that I like tried to buy like a water to like wash the taste out of my mouth. And my hand was shaking so much that I couldn't buy the water. So I had to like ask one of my coworkers to like buy the water for me. They asked me, like, have you had panic attacks before? Like, is this something you've dealt with? And I have before. So I told them, like, yeah, this is like something that's happened before. And they asked me, like, do you take any medication for it? And I don't. And so I was like, well, I don't take any medication for it. But I was like, I want an ambulance, because I figured if I can go to the hospital, like, because it kind of like struck me. I was like, wait a minute, like, if I can go to the hospital, like, even if I'm not going to take the medication that they offer me, I was like, I can probably escape better from a hospital, or at least I can buy myself time. I was admitted to the hospital. They like, they had me visited by the doctor. Some nurses talked to me. They offered me some medication, which I declined to take. And so I made some phone calls. I figured out a way out of there, but I had to leave the hospital on my own, which was going to be really tricky, considering that my dad was outside the hospital. Police were outside the hospital. There were police inside the hospital aware of what was going on. All of the nurses were like, they knew that I was like in police custody and not supposed to be allowed to leave, And where I was, there was only one exit out of the section of like the hospital that I was, with like some rooms and whatever. And so like there was only one way out, and all of the nurses were like sitting in their like office spaces, like right next to the exit. Like, they were right there. And so after the doctor left and the nurses left, I like went to the bathroom, because I was like, well, if I go to the bathroom, I can like scope out like how easy it'll be to leave, like what my options are for leaving, how I can possibly escape. And so I went to the bathroom, and like it made the nurses kind of suspicious, because they were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you out of your room? But I was like, oh, I'm just going to the bathroom. So when I walked around, I kind of realized, like, okay, my only way out is this one door. And I was like, I just kind of have to wait till they're not looking. So when I got back from the bathroom, I like organized all my stuff. I like put everything like back in my bag. I then like tried to straighten out my clothes and whatever, and like tried to like sort out my appearance, make myself look normal again, because I had obviously like been like crying and throwing up and like struggling to breathe. So I looked kind of insane. So I wanted to look as like normal as possible. And I had been dressed for like business casual at the time. Like, I'd been wearing like slacks, a blouse, and like a cardigan or whatever. So I just tried to like make myself look like as classy and normal as possible, so that I could walk out without being noticed, and like not wearing a gown or something. And so I waited until none of the nurses were looking, and like for a split second one of the nurses had like turned to type something in on her computer, and so I was like, okay, like this is my chance. And so I like tried to like, walk out the door as calmly as possible. And there was like an exit directly in front of me, but I actually like turned down one of the other hallways and like kind of went through this like winding, like weird route, because I figured that if they were going to be waiting for me, it was going to be at the obvious exit. So I wanted to go out like the weirdest place possible so that no one would really be waiting for me there, because they would obviously think like, okay, she's upset, she wants to get out as soon as possible, she's going to choose the nearest exit. So I was like, I want to go somewhere further away, somewhere where no one's going to be watching. So I went to like a totally different area, and I left the hospital, and it was like terrifying because I remember there was this moment when I was walking out where I thought I saw my dad in one of the cars, and I like freaked out, but I was like, I need to just keep walking, like act normal, act like you belong here. And I was like, they might not even notice. Like, and so I kept walking down the street, and then I actually took off my cardigan and like tied it over my head to look kind of similar to like, I don't know, some kind of like a headscarf or something, the way that I tied it, because I wanted to like obscure my face without seeming suspicious. So I figured, if I'm walking around like slacks and a blouse with like a headscarf or something, no one's really gonna bat an eye. Like, I ended up having to spend that night like laying in a ditch behind a hotel. And I was like freezing cold because I had actually lost the cardigan because I had like dropped it somewhere. And I tried to spend like part of the night like in various businesses, but it was like I was worried about people asking questions because obviously a young woman being out alone at night, and I was freezing cold. I got totally bit up by like spiders and bugs, and it was horrible. And I like didn't want to fall asleep because I was very worried about like if I fall asleep, what's going to happen. I didn't want to like miss my ride because obviously I couldn't like be in a visible place, so I had to just be awake when they were going to show up. Dirty at this point. I had actually not slept very well the night before because the police had come to my door in the middle of the night, and I had been like super disturbed and not really slept well. And I'd finished an 8-hour shift at work. I was not really feeling great because it was like I finished this shift at work. I literally like sprinted away from the hospital, had to like walk super far, get picked up, and then it was like I was laying in a literal ditch, like freezing cold. The only thing that I had with me was my purse and like the clothes I was wearing, which was like a very thin shirt and like a pair of pants. And which like I changed my clothing since like leaving, because thankfully like I'd gotten a change of clothes. But it was like I was not really in great shape. And also I had like shut off my phone completely, like, completely like turned it off because I didn't want anyone tracking me. Like I'd already gone into the settings and turned off all location services, but I had like not only done that, but I had like shut off my phone, like actually shut it off. And so it was just like there was nothing to do. I was just laying in a ditch, terrified, cold, and like with nothing to do, nothing to occupy me. And I knew that I had to spend the entire night like this. And it was probably like one of the longest nights of my entire life. Like it was miserable and terrible. And like the following day, like I had to stay awake like all day too, because it was like I didn't want to fall asleep like while on the road. Because obviously like I didn't want to like anything to happen while I'm asleep or anything like that. And so it was horrible because I ended up having to be awake for like such a long amount of time, because until I got to where I was going, like I could not sleep. And so by the time I arrived at where I was going, like I had not slept, I had not showered in like so long, and I was like totally miserable and upset, obviously, like because this whole thing was like this total disaster and nightmare. That's pretty much like what happened. And as of right now, no one knows where I am. And when I left, the only things I had, as I said, like were like a shirt and a pair of pants and like my purse, which obviously just had like stupid random stuff, like, a lipstick and a wallet, stuff like that. And so like I had nothing when I got to where I was going. I couldn't use my bank account for fear of like leaving a paper trail of like, having made a transaction here or there or something. I couldn't like use anything like that. And it was like I didn't want to contact my family, like my aunt and uncle, because I didn't want them to get in any sort of legal trouble. I already felt bad for like, obviously all the inconvenience I'd caused. And so it was like I just wanted to like not involve anyone like that, anyone that I'd known before, like any of my friends, any of my family, any of those kinds of people. I just didn't want to involve them. Like I wanted to keep them out of it. And so it was like I was starting over for the second time in like 3 months. But this time I didn't have like a suitcase of clothes and like some family supporting me. Like this time I had nothing. I had no money. I had no things. Like I had like a totally dirty, gross outfit. I had like no one to help me, like from my family, because like I couldn't involve them. Like, and it was like, it was a terrifying feeling. Like, I remember like, at one point when I was like, leaving, I was like in this like bathroom and it was like the middle of the night. And I just remember looking in the mirror and like my appearance was trashed. And I realized like, I don't have anyone or anything right now. Like, I'm 17 years old and it's just me. And like what I'm wearing right now is like the extent of my possessions. And I was like, my parents would probably kill me if they got the chance. Like that's where I'm at right now. Like, and it was like such a like scary feeling. Like I was like, I don't have anyone. I don't have anything. Like in this moment, I'm alone. It's the middle of the night. Like it was not an easy thing to deal with, and my parents are like not obviously telling people about this. Like no one understands like what happened, and that my dad like came to my work and was like threatening me and screaming at me, and that like, I was like in grave danger, and that now I'm 17, I'm alone, and it's like, I'm having to deal with all of this. And people don't know this because obviously like from their like it doesn't make them look good to all of their followers when it's like their daughter's being like hospitalized for a panic attack because I saw him, and it's like, so they aren't telling people this. People don't know this, but that's the current situation. Like I'm not with my parents. I'm not living with my aunt or uncle. Like I'm on my own right now because of them.
So really quick, I want to go back to kind of talking about your childhood and upbringing. I'm sure you've seen the interviews I've done with your brothers at this point.
Yeah, I
And
have.
in the comments for those interviews, there are a lot of who I assume to be either members of your dad's congregation or just fans of his preaching who accuse particularly John of making things up and lying to kind of defame your father. I was wondering if you'd be able to corroborate some of these stories and some of the things that they said.
Yeah, so I'll just start out by saying this. 100% of the things that they said are true. And they are all things that both like me and my siblings all remember. Like those stories are 100% true. And if anything, in my first brother's interview, my second brother, he, if anything, did not really talk about like a lot of stuff, but everything that he talked about was 100% true. Like there are so many more stories, if anything, that like were not even brought up just because obviously for sake of time, like they can't go into every single story because this was like almost a daily occurrence, if not a daily occurrence, where like extreme abuse was happening. And so they, if anything, could not talk about everything, but everything that they said was 100% true. And I personally witnessed all of those events, whether it be the thing with the pistachios that I remember happening very vividly. And there were even more scenarios like this. Like I can't remember if he brought this one up, but there was a time that like it's similar to that situation. There was a time that there was like a water glass that someone had broken and no one admitted to like having broken it. And my mom just decided like, okay, we're going to beat everyone until someone admits to breaking it. And then she actually like, she was like beating me and she was like, oh, like, see how like she's in so much pain. Like, why is no one admitting to like having done this? Like, if you've done this and you see how much she's like being hurt, like, why aren't you admitting to this? Like, don't you care about her? Like, like, don't you want to admit that you did this? Like, don't you see how much pain she's in? Like,
Just based off of, and I'm sorry to interject, but I'm just thinking through from what I've heard from John, if somebody had come forward and said, hey, yes, I did do this, please stop hitting Miriam, they would have gotten an even worse beating for lying in the first place. If
Oh
that
yeah. Oh
okay.
yeah. Because if you admitted to having done something, then it was, well, first you get a beating for lying and then you get a beating for having done it. It's easy to say like, oh, well, I would admit to stuff to like get people out of trouble. But when it actually comes down to it, when you're a little kid, you know, and you're scared and you're seeing someone else like being beaten horribly and like begging for mercy, and it's not really easy in that moment to like speak up. Like, and obviously a lot of times it was like someone hadn't even done anything wrong. Like sometimes it was like with the water glass, I'm pretty sure it just fell off the shelf because literally everyone had an alibi, and it was on this like super wonky shelf where anytime you slammed the door, the shelf would like rattle. And so realistically, it was probably just put on the edge of the shelf and it fell off, or maybe a little kid did it. But it was like all these situations where it wasn't really clear if anyone had even been responsible. And if someone had been responsible, it could have been a little kid. I mean, there were a lot of kids in my family, obviously, and like little kids will do things and they aren't even necessarily aware of what's being talked about or who did it. And so then it would be like all of the older kids who are being questioned are innocent, but then it's like someone feels the need to confess to get someone else out of trouble, or no one feels the need to confess. And then like in the water glass situation, it was like I just received this horrible beating because it was like no one spoke up. So it was kind of just like, well, we're going to beat Miriam till Miriam admits or someone else admits from seeing Miriam and feeling bad for her. I ended up just getting this like terrible beating. Or like when it came to the pistachios, my mom was convinced, absolutely convinced that like my brother had taken these pistachios, which he hadn't. But it was like she was just so convinced of that she told my dad, like, do not stop beating him until he admits to taking the pistachios. Like, and it wasn't like, oh, you know, like maybe he did, so we'll just give him like a spanking or something in case he did. Like, it was always very important to them for some reason to get like a confession. Like, they wouldn't just give you a spanking as if you had done it. They were going to keep beating you until you admitted to doing it, which, since the vast majority of the time you hadn't even done it, like, you know, we didn't want to admit to things that we hadn't done because that's like a terrible feeling, obviously, of like, well, I don't want people thinking that I did something that I didn't do. And then also, like, if you admitted to something, like if you were like being beaten to admit to something and then you did admit to it, then they'd be like, okay, now you're going to get a spanking for lying in the first place and making us have to beat it out of you. And growing up, my parents also put locks on the fridges and freezers and the cabinets. So we could not get into the food. Like, we could not take snacks or eat like when they didn't want us to, because they would often punish us by not giving us food. Like, we would be sent away with no food, or my mom would feed us this thing where she would put oats and water and like brewer's yeast in a bowl because it's like extremely unappetizing to eat. Like, it tastes terrible. And especially like with the texture of like that like oatmeal like texture and like this horrible flavor, it's hard to eat without throwing up. And growing up, if she ever fed us like food like that just to like be like a punishment, because if she like quit feeding us for like, you know, days, obviously that would cause like health problems. So she would only like force us to miss like a few meals, and then it was like she would like force feed us like this weird like gross thing so that she could be like, well, you know, I'm not starving you, like I'm giving you this food. She would either like dump salt in it till it like tasted absolutely horrific, or she would fill it with like brewer's yeast where it's just disgusting and like completely unpalatable. And then she would tell us, like, because I would like, particularly me, I would always like gag like violently and like I could not keep it down. She would tell us, like, if you throw it up, I will make you eat it, like after you've thrown it up, which was like obviously horrific. Like,
Did
it was
that
like,
ever happen?
I have never been made to eat like food that I threw up, because it was like if I ever threw up, I would keep it in my mouth, and she would be like, if you spit that out, like don't you dare like swallow it. She'd be like, swallow it right now. Like, do not spit that out of your mouth.
Okay.
I have been in multiple like situations where it was like she would feed me food just to make me sick as like a punishment. And then it was like, if you throw that, like if you dare spit that out. And like there were a couple times when I spat out and she would like violently hit me across the face, and she would like hold my head like by my hair, because I've always had like long hair, and she would like hit me in the face with paddles and like her fists. And it was like, I knew like if I dare spit out this food, like I am going to get like beaten so badly. And so it was like a big punishment when they took away food or made us eat these things. And the thing is, they liked doing this as a punishment because it didn't leave marks. And obviously they did a lot of punishments that left marks or like injured us, where we would have bloody like welts on our arms and like stripes on our back. We would have all sorts of bruising. There was even a time that my dad like hit my brother's head into something, and he had like a like cut, and it was all the way down to his skull, actually, like you could see the bone. And so it was like
really
things
really
like,
quick on that subject. I know you haven't watched it, but recently your dad, as kind of an answer to the things that you and your brothers have talked about, he had a sermon recently on corporal punishment where he said that he has never done anything unbiblical, and that, you know, it is, of course, I'm sure you've heard the verses over and over again about, you know, you're not supposed to spare the rod, and not supposed to make somebody bleed. That just like the kind of the biblical justifications that he has used for these beatings.
mhm.
But would you say that those things are accurate? Because the way that he framed it is that he and Zsuszanna rely mostly on spanking as a punishment.
That is not true. So many of the punishments that they would use were not spanking. For example, when I was a little kid, they had this brilliant idea to do what they called cold showers, which was when my mom would take me fully clothed and she would throw me into an ice cold shower in the middle of winter, which like people don't really think of Arizona as getting cold, but Arizona does get cold in the winter, especially when you're turning the shower tap on cold and turning the air conditioner up. And so what she would do is she would take me, and I mean like as a small child, like 2, 3, 4 probably, and she would take me fully clothed and hurl me into the shower. She would turn the tap on ice cold, and she would hold my head to where I couldn't move it, and she would spray me in the face with ice cold water. And it was a sensation like to that of drowning, because I couldn't breathe because there was water like in my face, like, you know, and it was ice cold water as well. This is wintertime. And she would use this to punish me, which obviously I don't really know what I was doing as like a 2 and 3 and 4-year-old that was so bad, but this was her way of preventing it, I guess, because apparently, according to them, when I was little, I was stubborn or something. And so they decided that they could like kill me rather, like they said that they could like beat me to death before I would like give in and like, you know, obey them or something, which I don't really know if that was true or not. And so this was like their way of like intimidating me, where they would just like, they would do this to me, and it was like a pretty regular occurrence. And then when they were done with this, and she like hit me in the shower and stuff too, but when they were done doing this, like I would be thrown in bed like soaking wet and like freezing cold, and they would take away my blankets, so it would just be like I would just have to lay there, and I wasn't allowed to cry or anything like that. Like if I cried, I would get like beaten. So I would just have to lay there like freezing cold in like my wet, soaking wet clothing. I wasn't allowed to like change into like pajamas, and I'd have to just lay there and just shiver in silence. And I couldn't cry, I couldn't scream, I couldn't say anything. Like, and this was like a common occurrence. Like this was like their go-to punishment for me for years as a little kid. And they did it to my sister as well, my younger sister. Did the same thing to her because they thought it was like such an excellent idea. Because admittedly, it did work in that I was terrified because it was a feeling like being drowned. And another punishment that they like to use was they would hold kids upside down, like little kids, and they would beat the bottoms of their feet. And I think it was partially because if kids have marks on the bottoms of their feet, people can't see it. So when we had like swollen, beaten feet, like they would be like bruised and swollen, sometimes even like, you know, a little bit bloodied, people couldn't see it because it was the bottoms of our feet, you know. They would also like to beat like the back of our calves and things because that was like a very painful spot, obviously. My mom would constantly hit me in the face, which is not at all, that's not a spanking by anyone's, definition. She would constantly hit me in the face with paddles, her hands. She would do things like that. My parents would beat us with an electrical cord. As I mentioned earlier, like my dad would beat my mom with an electrical cord. He beat us with the same cord. And that's obviously not a spanking. Like they would be beating us like on our faces, on our necks, like our chests, our backs, our legs, like all over us. Like there's not a part of my body that I have not been beaten on. Like literally they would just attack us essentially. It wasn't like, okay, bend over, you're getting a spanking. It was like just a full-blown attack. They wanted to do whatever they could to intimidate us, hurt us. They would intentionally like try to get in our heads and mess with us. Like I remember this one time I was like cleaning the house or something because it was just kind of what I did. And she was like, Miriam, she was like, every time I see you, she was like, I want to spit in your face. And she was like, just seeing your face makes me so like angry and sick to my stomach that she was like, every time I lay eyes on you, I want to spit on you. If I walk into a room and you're in there, you better just walk out silently and not say a word to me. Because she said, if I see you, I'm going to want to spit on you and I'm going to feel sick. She said, and I don't want to go through my life feeling sick. And she said, and you make me sick. So I don't want to go through my life feeling sick. So like, you're just going to have to avoid me.
It seems like from what I heard from both you and John, that certain kids got that kind of treatment more than others. It seems like you and John in particular, and maybe it's just because, you're two the only that I talk to, but got this kind of either exclusionary or, in the case of your mother, being targeted and singled out for this kind of treatment. Is that fair to say?
So my parents definitely like had favorites when we were growing up. Like certain of my siblings were like spared a lot of like beatings and things. We were all abused though. Like there was no sibling who never like got beaten or got a meal withheld from them or was made sick or something. Like everyone was hurt and everyone was abused. Like no one was like, exempt from this, but it was like there were definitely kids that got picked on like way more. And it was like my brother John, definitely growing up, he was constantly getting beaten for things. He was constantly being insulted and like for various things. Like I remember even when we were like getting older, like even like as a teenager, I remember like my dad was like poking him in the stomach and like calling him fat and things. If anything ever happened, like one time we were like all like playing and being too loud, I guess, and it was like during like some sort of like a church thing. I think it was like a preaching class or something. And my dad just like came in and just like decided that John was responsible. And so like even though all of us had been making noise, it was like John just got beaten horribly because it was just kind of decided that he was responsible for it. And like I had this like one specific memory of like we were watching like Ninjago, which was like the one show that we were allowed to watch when we got a little bit older. And it's like this like little like Lego Ninjago show. And it was like, I think, and like my parents, like, I don't think they were home at the time. So like we had like this little DVD set that we would like turn on when my parents were there. It's kind of like, we're going to sneak some Ninjago, And so like we were all like gathered around our little like computer in like the office and we were like sitting on like bar stools and whatever chairs we could find because we didn't have like a TV and we didn't like, have like a like nice place to watch stuff. So we were just like gathered around this like computer. And I remember my brother John was wearing this like white undershirt and he had like, this was like shortly after he was like beaten. And so he had like these like stripes on his back that were like swollen and stuff. And he was kind of like hunched over and like one of the scabs, I guess, had like opened up a little bit. And so like blood started like trickling out of it. And I just remember like watching his shirt like slowly turn red in the shape of like the stripe. And it was like, we were just like, watching this little show and it's like, well, I guess now we have to go like tend to this wound and stuff. Usually like I was very like, as a child, I did anything my parents said. So it was usually not like I would get in trouble like for doing things because I like followed the rules like to a T. I was like, super careful about like always being like so respectful and so nice, and like I would just go above and beyond. But it was like my parents, like particularly my mom, like was always blaming me for marriage problems with my dad. And especially once I got older, it was like I would buy my mom flowers like probably like every other week or something. And she told me like, "Oh, you're just such a fake, horrible person that you think that like being nice or abiding by the rules will like make you seem like a nice person. Like you're a horrible person. Like no one like, no one cares about you." And growing up, I didn't have friends, and that's mainly just because I didn't really have a way to make friends. I didn't go to school, and it was kind of like she would always tell me like, "Oh, like you don't have friends because no one likes you. Like you're not a likable person. No one loves you." And I remember one specific thing that she said to me that has kind of like stuck with me is she told me, she said, "Out of all the people in the world," she said, "Your mom is like the person who will love you the most and like put up with like the most stuff from you." And she said, "And I can't even stand you." And she said, "So how can you expect anyone else to?" And so it was like growing up, it was like she despised me. And that was like the kind of thing that she would say to me like all the time. And and my dad kind of like, that's how he kind of treated my brother John. Also, for some reason, I was held responsible for all the marriage problems. And it was constantly like, "Oh, it's your fault. Like it's you." And I remember my mom would constantly tell me that she was gonna drive away and never come back. When I was a little kid, she would be like, "I'm gonna leave and I'm never gonna come back." And then she would like leave and like go to the grocery store or something. And I remember like sitting at home and thinking to myself, like, mom's not gonna come back. And if mom doesn't come back, dad's gonna be really mad. And I don't know what dad's gonna do when he's mad at mom. And it was like I got so used to like my dad lashing out at me when he was mad at my mom that it was like this scary feeling of like, well, if mom doesn't come back, what's dad gonna do? Like, what's he gonna do to me? Like, he's gonna blame me for this. Like, I had something to do with it. My sister, like, would like sing sometimes too. And it was like my mom, like, anytime I would like practice my singing, because I would like sing for events and things, she'd be like, "Oh, like, she sounds like she's being hurt. Like, ew, like who wants to listen to that?" And then like anytime my sister would sing anything, which like my sister does have a beautiful voice, but it was like anytime she would sing anything, it's just like, "Oh, like, do you hear how beautiful Rebecca's voice is?" Like, but then it was like me, like I'd be like going to sing for an event. It's just like, really? Like you're gonna sing? Like, ew, like who wants to listen to that?
Do you, and I guess this is kind of a personal question, so I'll ask it and then kind of lay out why I'm curious. But do you still, because John uh does still consider himself Christian, do you still after, of course, growing up in a church with such a fervent father as the figurehead, do you still consider yourself Christian? And when I talk to you and when I talk to John, I see people who are incredibly kind, kind-hearted. Like just the idea of wanting to help your siblings, of in your case, not necessarily even holding the abuse against your own parents. Do you think that that upbringing allowed you to take the good messages from Christianity and try and apply them to your life, despite how poorly your father and some of the church members live by them?
Yeah, so I'll say this. I am still a Christian and I'm still like practicing Christian. Like I attend church. I still am like definitely like I still believe in Christianity, but I'm not the kind of Christian that my parents were. Like I don't believe in a lot of things that they preached and taught. I don't believe in the way that they went about things at all. And I will say this, my faith is not really even necessarily from my parents, because if anything, my parents made me question my faith as a kid, because like it was hard to like want to go to church when it's like my dad would be like assaulting me and assaulting my mom, and then it's like we have to go and put on our long sleeve church clothes so that we can go to church and lie to everyone and say that everything's wonderful. And so it was this feeling of like major hypocrisy. And so if anything, it made me like resent being a Christian. Like I was like, if this is what Christianity is, like what is this? Like this isn't what I see in the Bible. This isn't what this should be. And it wasn't until I got older and I kind of like, I got around like other Christians, right? And it was like people who were actually nice and they actually loved their neighbor and they weren't judging everyone and they weren't freaking out and saying that it's okay for, you know, someone to assault their loved ones, you know? And it's like getting older, I got around other Christians and I realized that a lot of Christians are loving people and they do genuinely like believe what they teach and they do believe in God and they believe in his love and his mercy, and they're not just using him as this like boogeyman to like, you know, take their anger out on people or give them a platform to scream at people and get angry and like, and so it was like getting older, I got around a lot of really kind Christians and I went to other churches that were really just loving and kind, and I learned a lot of great things, and it kind of helped me get back in touch with my Christianity because obviously as a little kid I was like very like, you know, like I loved being a Christian. I loved going to church. Like as screwed up as my dad's church was and still is, I liked the feeling of going to church. I liked reading the Bible. I still love reading the Bible. But it was like when I got older, it was like hard for me to like enjoy those things because I was like I had like negative associations with it. Like it kind of became this thing where I associated it with my dad and like his ministry, and I didn't like that. And so it was like it was kind of healing for me, like as a teenager and stuff, to get around other Christians that were kind, wonderful people. Like, for example, my aunt and uncle are both very kind people. They're very respected in their communities. I've lived with them for months and they have been nothing but loving and kind, not only to me, but to other people. They are people who really just are kind of like exemplary Christians to me. Like, I think that's what, you know, Christianity should look like. It should look like loving people and loving God, obviously. And so I am 100% a Christian. Like I still am very like I read the Bible, I pray. I still very much believe in Christianity. I just don't believe in what my parents teach. Like I believe in kind of what Christianity should be, not what they've like twisted it and like made it into, if that makes sense.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Pastor Johnathan Shelley, who recently put out a video, of course, with everything that the interview with your brother that people have found out about your dad and your mom. He's one of the first, if not only, NIFB pastors who have felt a need to come forward to defend your father. And I watched that defense, and it felt very like, just my honest opinion, felt very much like trying to cover up for anything your father did do, and defending your father first and foremost over his kids, over any possible victims. Did you happen to watch that? And if you did, what are your feelings on it?
Yeah, so I actually did watch that video last night, and I was extremely upset by the video on for multiple reasons, but it was very, very upsetting to me because it was like he was like denying that anything had happened, even though I'm fairly certain that he knows that what he was saying was not true. I was told by my brother that he actually admitted that my dad had admitted doing all of those things to him and had admitted being abusive to my mom and my siblings. But not only was he denying, like without any real basis, like even if he hadn't known that those things were going on for sure, there's nothing to state otherwise. I mean, I'm now the third one in my family to talk about the abuse that happened, and there's no evidence that it didn't. Like, and there is evidence that it did. I mean, my brother, for example, has a scar on the side of his head. Like that shows, people can look at that, you know, like that's a very like, you know, just concrete piece of evidence. And it's like, it was like he was just kind of dismissing it out of hand as like, oh, you know, these teenagers are just, you know, being teenagers. Like, no, we're talking about very real things that happened. And he was like dismissing it, but then at the same time he was almost making excuse for it, like, oh well, it's none of my business. And then he even made a remark about his mother using a 2x4 and almost sounded like he was defending this. And so he was kind of like almost prepping people for like, well, you know, if it is true, like, you know. And so he was kind of trying to make it out that like even if these allegations were true, they're none of no one's like business, you know?
Well, and one of the things that Pastor Shelley mentioned was the idea of, a prodigal son and essentially laying the blame at the feet of Isaac and John as being rebellious, kind of wayward youth who would hopefully, come back into the fold at some point and realize their mistakes. And I've seen a lot of that same sentiment reflected in the comments on both of those videos by, again, either fans of your father's teachings or members of the congregations who will say things like, they should be grateful to their father for putting a roof over their head. They should be grateful for raising them in the right way, and that they're going against God by doing all this stuff. In a lot of ways, sounding like the same things that if John, his testimony is to believe, which I do, the same kind of fear mongering that your father would use to keep y'all in line, if that's correct. And
Mhm.
what would you like if you could talk to the people talking about your siblings like that and saying that, oh, you're just either doing it for attention or you're doing this to you know tear down your family, or you're going against God by doing this, what would you say?
So here's the thing is that that's another thing that like my parents brought up to me was they were like, well, you're going against God to like not come home because, children have to obey their parents or whatever. And kind of like making it this thing of like, well, you're this like wayward youth or whatever. Whatever you think about us doesn't really matter. What we're saying is true. And also, from the perspective of other people, there's nothing that anyone can really point out that I'm doing that is like this wayward youth thing to do. Like currently, I am just a young woman. I'm a Christian. I live a very clean life. I've never partaken of any kind of drugs or alcohol. I'm very careful about like what I do. I'd like to think I'm pretty responsible as a individual. Especially, for being young. And I understand that obviously, young people, they go out and have fun. I'm not judging anyone who does that. But if someone's going to like completely just disregard the things that we say based on the way that we lead our lives, first of all, that's ridiculous. And that's not really a fair way to judge things. But secondly, there's nothing that anyone can point to about me as a person. Like, I'd like to see anyone point to something that I'm doing that they like find morally reprehensible. Like, I'm, even by their standards, like whether or not you agree with their standards, even by their standards, I am leading a very simple, very just basic lifestyle. I'm not going out and doing anything crazy. I'm not saying anything that's crazy or controversial. I'm not doing anything that could really offend anyone. And so it's like, if they disregard my testimony as someone who, even by their standards, is not going astray, and the only thing that they can really point to of me going astray or whatever is like this situation, then that's not really fair. And also, like, when it's like 2, 3 witnesses, like even in biblical times, it's like you get together 2 or 3 witnesses. That's how every word is established. I haven't done anything to cause my testimony to be disregarded. And so if people want to disregard what I say, that really says something about them and the fact that they're believing what they want to believe, or that they're in denial about it, because it's like, I've given them no reason to question my testimony. And this situation has hurt me more than it's hurt my parents, if anything. I mean, I'm out here, I'm 17 years old. I don't have anyone in my life to help me. I have no money. I literally, like, I have a few outfits now, but it's like I had like a pair of pants and a shirt. That's all I had. Like, I had no, like, anything, no clothes, no money, no stuff. Essentially, I didn't even have toiletries. So it's like, it's hurt me every bit as much as it's hurt them, if not way more. And it's like, what motive would I have to lie about this? Like, why? Like, why would I, if I were living in some happy-go-lucky, wonderful household that was just such a blessing to even be in, I'm so lucky to have been there, why would I just randomly be like, well, let me just uproot my entire life and lose everything lose my college education, which I worked hard for my grades. Like, I had a 4.0 GPA. I worked hard in college, lose that overnight, lose my job, which again, I worked hard for, lose everything that I had worked for, lose the ability to talk to my siblings, which has been super difficult for me, lose contact with everyone in my life. Why would I do that? For what purpose? Like, if this weren't all true. I did it because I was concerned about my life. I did it because I was concerned about my well-being. I did it because I spent my entire childhood watching those around me get hurt and being hurt myself deeply on a physical and on a mental level. And seeing that and being part of that and being in that environment for years and years has hurt me in ways that I don't think many people will ever hurt me that bad in my life other than my parents. At least I would hope so. And it's like, this whole situation has been horrible. And I did not just do this on a whim. Like, it's not just like, oh, I don't have plans this weekend, so I think I'll ruin my life. Like, this whole thing came about because I was desperate, because I was in a horrible situation, a painful situation that, I don't think a lot of people have been through. And I'm glad about that, because I don't want other people to go through this, but people need to at least try to put themselves in my shoes and understand what I went through and what my siblings went through and how difficult that was for us as kids, and even going into our adult lives, how hard this is. Like, and it's not easy to be 17, scared of the police, scared of your parents, no one to, help you. It's not easy to be in this situation. And I didn't just, cause the situation for no reason. Like, there's a very real reason behind this, and people need to take this seriously, because if people don't take this seriously, it's just going to happen again, and it's going to happen to other families. And I don't want it to be where kids can't speak out and get justice, because I know what I've been through, and I know what it did to me, and I know how badly it hurt me and my siblings, and I don't want other kids to have to go through. And so people need to take these things seriously. When someone reports abuse, that needs to be a serious thing. And people need to stop just writing it off based on who the person is or if they like the person. Like, this is a serious situation. It needs to be dealt with as such. And people need to maybe take a step back, and instead of just, being these keyboard warriors explaining why we're so wrong, like, maybe they should actually think about the fact that what would it take for them at 17 to lose everything that they had and be scared and alone? What would it take? Like, what would it take for them to give up everything that they've spent the last few years working for and lose everything? Like, that's not a light thing,
Really quick, because you are the first, daughter of the family I've spoken to. What were some differences, I guess, that you noticed growing up as a woman in the family compared to how the boys were treated?
I would say one of the biggest things was like, as a girl, we were not allowed to get jobs. We were not allowed to work. We were expected to be home, like, most of the time. My parents would constantly reference the, like, keepers at home thing. And I think that they like use that as like a literal, like, you have to be at home. So they would like, they want us to be like at home, like, all the time. They wouldn't want us to go out with people. We weren't allowed to go to work. And so my brothers had slightly more freedom in that they could go to work and they could hang out with people more often. Whereas it was like, for us girls, it's like, you have to stay home. You're not going anywhere, like, without like us. And even when they would go places, it's like, well, they were hesitant to bring us along because it's like, well, you need to like stay at home and you need to do the chores. And that was another thing, was like division of labor. It was like us girls were expected to do far more work, especially when it came to childcare, cooking, cleaning, things like that. Because it was like, well, you're going to be a homemaker one day. Like, you're going to have kids and you're going to have to care for them. And so my mom did not like to do a lot of the childcare herself. When she did it, she was not really, to put it nicely, great at it, because, like, for example, with the young babies, she would get very frustrated when a kid would cry. She would often like hit them. In particular, I remember when my sister Chloe was 4 months old, my mom like beat her with a paddle for crying. And so as a result, the babies like usually did not particularly like my mom, which honestly, like obviously that's horrible. But they did not really like her because she mistreated them and was very negligent. Like even when she was like watching the kids, she wasn't really like playing with them or engaging with them. And so because of that, it was like when we were growing up, it was kind of like usually the kids would like pick like one of like me or my sisters, and they would get kind of like attached to us, and we would almost like become the like mother figure in their life. And so it was like because of that, it was like we kind of were just responsible for these kids. Like we were responsible for raising them essentially. While my mom was just kind of like removed, she would just do other things. And her only real interactions with kids were usually negative. And so, like, growing up, it was kind of like the boys were more like allowed to do it as they pleased, and they were more allowed to like play and, you know, have fun or go hang out with like occasionally they would hang out with like a neighbor kid or something. Whereas like us girls, it was kind of like, well, you're gonna stay at home and you're gonna do the dishes and you're gonna take care of the baby. And we were like responsible for taking care of the kids. And if we were ever like, well, these are your kids, like that was a huge no-no. Like we were responsible for the kids. Like if a kid wasn't taken care of, it's like, well, why aren't you taking care of the kid? Like that's your responsibility. Like that's your job. And so whereas the boys like did not have that same responsibility towards like the kids and stuff. And also like the boys were not expected to like cook meals or like, you know, do as much housework. Like they were expected to do some housework, but it was not to the same level that us girls were. Also, when it came to dating, my brothers were allowed to do far more than us. Like when it came to us, it was like we were not allowed to date till we were 16. And at that point, it was like we could go on chaperone dates. And if we texted with a guy, it was like my parents could read all of the messages. And it was very limited, like the level to which we were allowed to text with people. Also, my parents were very picky about who we were allowed to date because my dad wanted me to be with like a certain kind of guy. And he did not always like the kind of guys that I like to text.
Out
Like,
of out of curiosity, I remember hearing a story about your mother specifying that she didn't want any of her kids and especially daughters dating black guys. Is that true?
yes, that is 100% true. My mom often told me as a child that she did not want me to date or marry a black guy. She insinuated that if I did, he would like hurt me or possibly even like she was and this is obviously terrible, but she would insinuate that he was going to hurt me or kill me possibly. And she would say that that's what happened when, you know, interracial marriage happened. And I didn't like do a lot of dating, you know. But it was like and I had like as a result, like, you know, never even gone out with like an African American guy or like a black guy or whatever. But it was like she kind of like she had this like thing about it and it really bothered me like and it's not like I had anyone specific that I was like trying to date because I wasn't even like in a mental place to be dating anyone, so it wasn't like this like fight with my parents where I wanted to date someone, they weren't allowing it. But like my mom would constantly just like preemptively tell me like you better not date a black guy, like you better not. And it really bothered me because I was just like, well, I'm not trying to date anyone specific right now, but also like, why are you doing this? Like, this is weird. This isn't appropriate. Like, you know, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, you know? And so it was like, she would constantly bring that up though. That was like a very real thing. And she would like complain about like, you know, if her like grandbabies like weren't white or something, which is really weird. That was a very real thing that was brought up. My dad did not ever say that to me. Like he was never like, you know, you can't marry a black guy or something, but he would constantly say to me like, oh, if you like marry a black guy or something, he would be like he has to come from like a good family because he was like otherwise, you know. And by good family he really just meant someone who like he like liked or whatever, that like and my dad liked people that like really like worshipped him and like thought he was great. And there were often guys like that who like thought my dad was really fantastic, so they wanted to date me because they kind of like viewed me as this like extension of my dad. And I think my dad liked people like that and wanted me to possibly like marry someone like that because then it's like, you know, they would impose a lot of the same like rules or whatever on me because obviously he believes in like, you know, women like obeying their husbands and whatever. So it was kind of like he wanted someone to impose those same rules so that I would not, after being married, change my lifestyle and it would make him look bad or whatever if I was like living a different lifestyle. So he wanted me to get married as soon as possible and to someone that like believes like him, and so that I would like be married and in the same like situation that I was at home, just like married now, so that it would still like protect his like public image, if that makes sense.
Did you ever hear your mom ever use like racial slurs at home?
Oh yeah. Yeah, my mom would use racial slurs. She would use the N-word. She would curse about various like racial groups and ethnicities. She would if there was ever like some kind of thing where someone had like, committed a crime or something and they were, a minority or something like that, she would always like point that out and be like, oh, we'll see, like, this is what this kind of minority is like. And like, look at these, whatever, like, and she was very racist, like towards other racial groups. And she would often like, and if we ever were like, hey, that's not really fair, you need to not say that, it was like, we would get in trouble for that. Like, you were not allowed to like speak up. And it was kind of like, well, you're in denial and you're ignorant if you don't believe these things, It was kind of like, and I was often called like naive and immature and stuff for not sharing her same racial views. It was like, I would be like, oh, well, you're just naive. You just don't know the statistics. You just don't know what you're talking about. And so you're just stupid. Like, you need to shut up because you're stupid and you don't know the facts. Like, I know the facts and you need to listen to me, but you're just not smart enough to. That was kind of the thought from her point of view. It was like, well, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking about.
After everything that's happened, after all the time you've spent alone and the effort you made to get away, if you could, safely just give a message to your mom and dad, what would that be?
I still love both of my parents, which like I realize is kind of like a controversial thing to say on some hand, because it's like it doesn't really make sense, like from like, I guess like an intellectual standpoint. Like, obviously, like, they've done a lot to me and my siblings that is kind of something that, is horrible. But I still love both of them. And it hurts me because I'm just so disappointed, because it's just such a waste. Like, they could have done anything with their lives. They could have had all of, us, and they could have treated us well. And, we could have had some like Thanksgiving where we all get together and we're all happy, and, they would have been happier like through all of that. And they could have had like a happier life, and they could have, like loved people and been loved in return. And I feel bad for them because honestly, they missed out on having a happy life. Like, they're not happy, and I love them and I feel bad for them. But at the same time, like, I'm so disappointed in their behavior, and I'm just like, and I'm hurt because I've never understood why they don't love me, and I've never understood why they had me if they weren't gonna love me. And so I don't know, I guess I just tell them that like that I love them, but like that like the way that they've hurt me is like something that they can like never like really repair. And so I would just like plead with them to just please, like, even if they never talk to me again, and even if they never like love me or care about me, or even if they're like never like kind to me or good to me, that they would just like be nice to my siblings, and that they would just like treat them well, and that like at least they would give them the childhood like that I never got to have, and that they could like grow up like feeling loved and not having to like feel unwanted their entire life. And I would just want them to like just treat them well, and like I would just want them to just, whatever they've done in the past, just put it behind them. Like, and there's no way that they can ever fix the things that they've done And I don't even need them to apologize to me. I don't want them to say sorry. I don't need that, but it's just I just want them to just I just want them to stop, and I just want them to take a step back and just with the time that they have left with their kids, if they have time left with their kids, because obviously I don't know what's going to happen with CPS, and obviously I do believe that it would be best if they were pulled out of that home. But you know what, if they do remain like with custody of my siblings, I just want them to just take care of them and just not continue this, and just realize how badly they've hurt us, and that it's not helping them, and it's not helping us, and just for them to just fix it. And like, I'm not mad at them. Like, I forgive both of my parents for everything that's happened, and I still love them. And you know what? I hope that maybe one day I can see them again, and they can treat me like a human being, and I'm willing to, and obviously I would treat them well, and I would be kind to them. But I just, even if they never want to see me again, and even if they want me dead, which is probably the case, I just want them to just do better with my siblings. Like, I have like a little brother who's like 2. I have a sister who's 4. I just want those kids to just grow up better than I did. And I just hope that my parents I just want them to fix this, and I just want them to just at least try. Like, I don't know if they're ever going to get better, but, maybe they could go to therapy, and maybe they could work through whatever it is that's hurting them on the inside, that's causing them to hurt other people. But I just want them to just do better with their other kids, or at least just, even if the kids get taken away, I just want them, they have a lot left on their life, and like, they still have time to like do better. And I just want them to do better. And I want them to know I'm not mad at them. I'm not angry. I forgive them and I love them, but they still have time to like be better people. And I just want that for them.
I think with that, I want to thank you very much for coming forward and for your bravery and your honesty with this. And know that there are people out there who support you and your siblings and want you to do well and are praying for you.